So really quickly, I will share my screen and go over Edge. Are you able to see?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So Edge, for those of you who may not have been engaged with Edge before, you found this via just Eventbrite and you're seeking to maybe learn a little bit more about the topic of discussion today, I welcome you. We're a very inclusive community who really thrive on benefiting, impacting, and promoting entrepreneurship, especially with a social lens. So I'm very happy to have each one of you here today. Tonight's session is focusing on evaluating the impact of your social enterprise, and it is one of many pieces of our Build Better series. If you wish to see more about our Build Better series, you can see way more stuff on our Eventbrite that you probably found the session on, as well as on our YouTube channel where we have recordings of previous sessions from either previous semesters or earlier in this semester. Before we begin, I would like to start with a quick land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that the land in which we gather has been and still is the traditional territory of several Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Huron, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Since time immemorial, numerous Indigenous nations and Indigenous people have lived and passed through this territory. We recognize this territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, which emphasizes the importance of joint stewardship, peace, and respectful relationships. And Sheridan affirms that it's our collective responsibility to honor and respect those who have gone before us, those who are here, and those who have yet to come. And we are very grateful for the opportunity to both be working and living on this land. Now, moving into our roadmap for today, we're going to offer some welcome and some introductions, and I would love to introduce Marlene a little bit later on. She will then proceed with a presentation and a whole bunch of different activities as we move our way through. There will be some opportunity for question and answer near the end of the session as well, but do feel free to say questions you have in the chat and we will keep a close eye on it. And then finally, we'll do a quick wrap up and close and point you each towards a bunch of different assets, as well as to the next session in this series, part 2 of evaluating your social enterprise, which will happen next week on the 23rd. Before we begin, I just want to remind everyone one more time, for the most part, we ask that your mic remain muted during the session. We don't want to have too much dissonance in the call. However, if you do have a question or if you do want to say something or ask something, feel free to raise your hand like Nirapan did before, or just put a quick message in the chat, as we'd be more than happy to see either answering your questions in the chat or bring it up from Marlene later. The session will be recorded and continues to be recorded for the duration of the session. If you have any questions about that or if you have any concerns, please feel free to let me know and we will get that figured out. Webcam is not mandatory, but highly encouraged. I want to thank you, Elizabeth, for staying on camera with us. I know it's a little bit tough sometimes, but it brings that little bit of a human connection. So thank you for staying on camera with us this evening.
This is Zoom meeting 642, so I can assure you I'm camera friendly.
Awesome, awesome. And like I said once before, if you have any questions, any comments, feel free to use the chat function. There's a little display of how you can access the chat function on the session. Just aim towards the bottom, there's a little chat button, and you can make sure that you actually type your questions in the chat. I do want to reiterate, as I mentioned before, if you guys would like to introduce yourself, I think that would be an awesome opportunity, maybe give some insight about your venture or maybe what you want to learn in the session this evening. And without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and actually let it pop over to Marlene, who would be our session facilitator for this evening and is free to introduce herself now.
Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. I'm just going to pull up the PowerPoint and share this with you. Give me 1 second here. Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. Okay. There we are. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. I love doing these sessions on program evaluation with all the social enterprise folks. I get a lot of great ideas after these sessions. So I'm benefiting from this just as much as you guys are benefiting. So my background, I'll just give you a really quick snapshot. And then if you have any questions, you'll feel free to ask. The session is very informal. I think of it more like a conversation, me sharing some ideas and then giving you pointers or helping you unpack how you want to evaluate your social enterprise. I assume that everybody is here because they either need to have an evaluation plan to apply for funding, or have are thinking about how they want to evaluate their social enterprise ahead of time, so you have these plans in place, which is really smart. So my background, just really quick, I have a PhD in sociology. I specialize in research methods, statistics, mainly. My big interest is program evaluation. I did it very formally for the Ministry of the Attorney General when I worked there before I became a full-time faculty member at Sheridan in the Applied Health and Community Studies program. I was a full-time policy advisor with the provincial government. So that's where my background, I actually have applied program evaluation experience. I also understand the other side of funding. So I know what the government is looking for when you all are applying for funding with respect to program evaluation. So please feel free to ask questions whenever you have them during the session. I will try my best to answer them, but if I don't, you can certainly interrupt me and ask a question. That's not a problem. So just to quickly go over the objectives, just really quick, my goal is to give you just a snapshot of what program evaluation is. We have 2 sessions. Obviously, I can't teach you in 2 sessions what I would teach my students in a year, but I'm unpacking for you, the professionals, the important points that you need to know. So what I've created for you as a tool, as you all have access to, is the program evaluation workbook. The whole point of this session is for you to start that workbook, and at the very end of the session, for you to have something tangible to work with. Okay, so, and to get you through that process, I'm going to tell you the basic steps in a program evaluation. We'll try and unpack how to ask the right questions. And then we'll look at creating a specific logic model for your social enterprises. Okay, so what I'm trying to sort of guide you through is understanding what program evaluation is and when it should be used, some of the strategies, tools, and methods. Again, we're not going to go into them in detail, but so you just have an idea of what an evaluation analyst would do. The common approaches. Now, there are 7 different types of program evaluations, but in this session, we're only going to cover 4 because they're probably the most pertinent to what you would all be doing with your social enterprise. So I really tried to make these sessions very targeted. So I have a question for you. So how many of you are confident, and you can come up and talk in the chat box if you want, how many of you are confident that you have an understanding of what program evaluation is and what it entails? So if anybody wants to go in the chat and say, how many of you are confident you have an idea of what program evaluation is?
That can even just be a simple yes or no.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so hopefully by the end of the session, you'll be able to answer that question, that you have a good idea of what program evaluation looks like. Okay, and that's my goal, is that you have some things in your back pocket for when you're starting your own evaluations. So this workshop is delivered in 2 parts. As you know, normally pre-COVID, it would be a 3-hour session. So what I've done is I've tried to divide it at junctures that make the most sense. So we will be talking about the different types of program evaluations that you can engage in. And then next week, we're going to be specifically working on creating logic models. Okay, so I think a lot of people really want to get that logic model under their belt, but first part we had to get through is to create a problem statement and do an evaluability assessment. So that's what we'll be looking at tonight. Okay, and then we'll talk about next steps. So for the snapshot, part 1 is just an overview of program evaluation. And as I mentioned, you'll be looking at creating a problem statement. Okay, but your ultimate goal today is for you to understand the importance of what a problem statement is and how it will guide your evaluation. Okay, So really our action items tonight are to create that problem statement, to do the evaluability assessment and the needs assessment, which are part 1, 2, and 3 of that workbook. And we'll be taking some breaks to work on to go into some breakout rooms and work on the workbook together. And I'll pop in and out, and if you have questions, you can let me know. Part 2 is going to be when we talk about the impact and outcome evaluation and doing a logic model. Okay, so those are the 2 components of the workshop. Okay. So programs versus projects. I like to start with this slide because I like to gauge how many of you actually understand the difference between what a program is and what a project is. So when we think of a program, we tend to think of a larger a larger way to deliver services or products to our customers or clients. And within a program, many of you will have specific projects that you deliver. So what you need to decide for your social enterprise is, are you delivering a program, so a larger venture? Is it just a project that might sunset in a year or 2, or are you looking for longevity? Or is it just a product within a program that you're developing? So these are the questions that I'm interested in knowing. So, and I want to mention, if you don't have a program or a project yet to evaluate, that's okay, because I think you'll still get a lot out of this session. So I'm going to start this poll by asking you, what are you interested in evaluating? A program, a project, a product? And remember, a product can be a part of a program, so you need to kind of differentiate between the 2. Or maybe you're not sure. So let's just get an idea of what everybody's interested in evaluating.
So the votes are actually fairly spread out across the board. I think not including the support staff. I think that's pretty much everybody who would have answered today. So I'm going to quickly end the polling now and actually share the results. So we're looking at pretty much 3, 3, 2, and 2. So 3 for program, 3 for project, 2 for product, and 2 for I'm not sure.
Okay, great. And and here's what I want to say to everybody. For those of you who are pretty sure of what you're evaluating, you may change your mind by the end of the session, and that's okay. For those of you who aren't sure, if at the end of this session you're still not sure, we can talk about it, and I can help you differentiate between what a program and project is and what you're doing. And that's why when we go to the Jamboard, that really helps me to understand what you all are doing when I get an idea of what your social enterprises actually encompass. So that's interesting. So just before we also start getting into the technical stuff, I just want to mention there, when we think about program evaluation, when you talk to people, or when I talk to my own students, I often hear it's really difficult and a complex activity, or it's really about showing that my program is successful or not. And sometimes because of that, people are hesitant to do program evaluations because they're afraid of having negative results, right? Or that it doesn't necessarily provide you with useful data. So what I want to talk about when I talk about myths is that, anything you do within program evaluation that helps you improve upon what you're doing, even if you get negative results, is a good thing, okay? And even if you get negative results, it's incumbent upon you to report those negative results and try to figure out a way to use those negative results to inform your program, product, or project. Okay, so negative results are not a bad thing. And also, the other thing, most people say, I don't know that much about program evaluation. But, how many of you feel like you've been evaluated your whole life, right? We all feel that way. And the great thing about program evaluation is now you're on the other side of it. You're doing the evaluating, albeit your own programs, but it's still good to be on the other side of doing the evaluation. We are evaluated every single day of our lives. You're evaluated in school. We're evaluated in our interpersonal relationships. We're evaluated, even when we do tasks at home, right? Evaluation is always part of our lives, and it doesn't have to be a daunting or negative thing. So what is program evaluation? So when we think of program evaluation, and I always ask my students this, and they always pause because they think of it as looking at something and asking, is it working? Is it good or is it bad, right? But program evaluation is actually a lot more than just that. It's a systematic method, which you're going to learn today. So we're going to learn some actual concrete, consistent methods on how to conduct program evaluation. But really what we're looking at, and for many of you, is we want to assess how effective is our program, product, or project. Is it efficient? Is it relevant? Does it make sense? And some of you that at the beginning of this of the session, you mentioned a few of your social enterprises. And I kept thinking about, wow, but those are really relevant to what we need in society today. So you're addressing a gap within society. And that's one of the things I love about doing social enterprise program evaluation, is because what I find, aside from the fact that all of your projects are so interesting, things that I personally haven't thought of before, but also that you're addressing a much needed, you're addressing a gap in society, right? You're looking at a problem and finding a way to address that problem. And to me, I find that very interesting. Program evaluation can also be about informing what you do in the future. And when we talk about that, what we mean is if you find that, for example, if you're evaluating your social enterprise and something isn't working, you may need to make a change, okay? And it's about also making decisions based on the results that you get. So making viable decisions. So basically, in a nutshell, program evaluation helps you figure out what's working and what's not working, right? Just in plain language, okay? So what can program evaluation do for you? There's a number of things it can do. It can help you highlight what your program, project, or product is achieving and who it's reaching within society. And it does, like most of your projects, when I end up talking to people in these sessions, I find that you're really addressing some need in society and really creating a sense of community within your social enterprises, which is really great. It should be informative, but it shouldn't have to be a really daunting task. And what I mean by that is when you're, for the capacity of what you all are doing, the program evaluations that you will be potentially conducting, you can do them yourself. When we're talking about a really large program evaluation, like for example, for government programs, a lot of times what they will do is hire a consultant to do that, and it's a 2 or 3 year long process. So you know, there are different types of program evaluations. So what your approach should be is to have a plan in place to do it. Nothing too daunting. Okay, it takes time and resources, but it doesn't always have to be difficult. Okay. So are there any questions so far? I should stop and ask. If anyone has questions, please feel free to you know, speak up and ask a question before I move on. I know we're going a little fast because last time we ran out of time because there was so much discussion. Does anybody have a question so far? No, we're good. Okay. So Jamboard. So I always like to, before we get into the technical part of this evening, ask you all to share in 3 words or less to describe your social enterprise. So let's take a couple minutes to do that. So in 3 words or less, I'm going to ask everybody in the session to describe their social enterprise.
I think just to make it easier as well, I'm going to give a brief introduction to Jamboard if anybody hasn't had the chance to use it before. Do you mind letting me share my screen?
Not at all. Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So just a quick overview so for anybody who's maybe not had the chance to use a Jamboard before. You can see here, and everybody would have gotten the link in the chat. The question that was just asked will be at the top, and if you would like to input an idea, you can go ahead and click on Sticky Note. Write out whatever your idea or the words that you have are. click save, and that will post it on here, and these are free to move around. So feel free to grab a sticky note. Everybody should have the ability to make an edit and add their own sticky note, and then go ahead and describe your social enterprise in 3 words or less.
And that's going to come onto this sheet here, Cole. We'll leave
Yeah,
that
so
up.
the one that I'm showing, I'm just going to leave up for the time being,
Okay.
so that we can all see as we're working through. Everybody should be able to see it at the same time as well.
Perfect.
Affordable mental health care. Perfect. I got a feeling that's Neuropan. Engage youth in space. That's 4 words.
We won't count the
I'm
in.
bugging.
I was gonna add exploration as well, and I already did not do that.
It's also STEAM, right? You work a lot with STEAM as a total.
Yeah, STEAM can be quite broad, which is why I decided to focus on the space part.
Given into space, you know, it fits. We'll give it maybe a couple minutes. I encourage everybody to put their ideas in here as well. It feels a little bare right now, so I'd love to see some more.
Yeah, and the reason I ask everyone to do this is it just gives me an idea of how to tailor the workshop. And especially, I mean, some of you have already introduced what you're doing. And again, so many really interesting ideas. But if I have an idea of what you're doing, it just helps me tailor it.
Awesome. We have backing local entrepreneurs, increasing donations.
Interesting.
Elizabeth, you're asking 3 words per sticky note, right?
I'm just teasing. It's hard to narrow down.
It's tough. It is tough. I'm assuming yours was creating employment solutions.
Yeah, but it's so generic and I'm not a fan of that. But that's what we're
Fair.
doing.
Remember, it's broad, right? So that's okay, right? This is just to give me an idea. This wouldn't be how you would describe your social enterprise to others. It's just more for me to get an idea.
Valid.
Some really neat social enterprises here.
Can we get one more maybe? Even if you're not exactly sure where you're sitting right now, and maybe you're still in the process of developing, and even just finding your value proposition, I really encourage you to try and work it out into a short form, because it's going to be very helpful for you in the long term.
Mm-hmm. And even if you're unsure, you could just write a couple words about just broadly what your social enterprise encompasses. Even if you're not really sure what it's going to do, just write the topic, right? So, for example, if the first one is affordable mental health care, if you weren't sure, you could just write mental health. That would be fine. Like just to get an idea of the area of what your social enterprise is going to examine. So yeah, it's just for me to get an idea. And again, how you describe your social enterprise, I'm going to ask you to think about that when you start to work on your problem statement. I suspect that for most of you doing social enterprise, your problem statement will probably be much easier because this is what you're going to address. This is what your social enterprise looks at either solving or addressing, right? So that most of you should have an idea of what that problem statement would look like. It's really just communicating it in a way that's succinct and direct. That's the challenge, and that's what we're going to work on tonight. Okay, so I think I have a good idea, Cole. So why don't we move on, because we end up getting running a little bit out of time. So maybe
I'll let you share again.
Yeah, I'll share. Okay. Okay, so thank you for those of you who shared. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what program evaluation, what it actually addresses and what it looks at. So some of you may be looking at structuring an evaluation that tries to measure whether or not your social enterprise achieves the goals that you set out to do. Some of you, and I'm assuming, Cole, maybe you can answer this question. Most people here tonight will not have started their social enterprise, right? This is the first juncture, or is there anybody here who actually has a program or a social enterprise that's on the ground running?
From my knowledge of actually just some of the ventures in here, I can speak to at least 3 that I know that are already up and running. But I would encourage people to, yeah, say it in the chat. Let us know where you're at along the continuum.
Yeah, so some of you then may be wanting to look at with your evaluation, how can the information you collect, how can it be improved? How can your project or program be improved? And of course, we don't, should we continue one is a question that everybody should ask, right? You have to look at, is my program doing what it set out to do, and is it worth it? In a government setting, we have a saying called value. It's a government standard, value for money, right? So is what you're doing worth the investment? Okay. And then are the results worth the program project costs? So you're spending money on a program or a project, and is it worth it? Are you actually seeing results? And those are important questions to look at. And everybody, the government, especially if you apply for grants, you will want to demonstrate results. So when you're designing an evaluation, you look at, there are kind of 5 different components we look at. So the first thing is you want to identify who is your audience, who's going to use this evaluation. So for some of you, I mean, most evaluations, let's be honest, are tied to some form of funding, right? For those of you who want to have support for your projects or programs, you need to demonstrate to funders that what you're doing actually works and is making a difference, especially within the whole social enterprise approach, okay? You want to have really clear goals, and we're going to do that in our evaluation workbooks. We're going to set what our goals are, okay? We're going to identify what the purpose is. You want to develop evaluation questions, okay? So, and these are not the questions, I'm not talking about the questions you would ask, for example, within an actual evaluation, like a survey. These are the questions that you are asking, your key evaluation questions, and we'll talk about that momentarily. You want to set realistic priorities, okay? Make sure that the evaluation is manageable. You want to consider the types of resources that you have. Is it realistic? And then I think the most important part is you want to engage your stakeholders. So does everybody have an idea of what a stakeholder is? I'm sure most of you have heard that term before. So stakeholders are really important. Does someone want to tell me why stakeholders are really important? Anybody have an idea of why stakeholders are important? Anyone? Have you thought about your stakeholders?
They're the ones with the money and support.
That's true. That's true. Often they are, but not necessarily always though. So I'll give you an example. When I designed the program evaluation to evaluate counseling, the sexual assault counseling centers in Ontario, we had a program advisory committee, and some of you may have a large enough social enterprise that you may form a program advisory committee. Program advisory committee comprises specific stakeholders that have a stake or have an interest in your project. And so some of the most important stakeholders I had to win over were the executive directors of the sexual assault centers and survivors, but they had nothing to do with funding, right? So some of your projects that you've already talked about today, so for example, mental health, the one that the Health Simple, the earlier one that was described, your most important stakeholders are not necessarily going to be the people with the money. It's going to be the people, professionals within the mental health community. Okay, and then Elizabeth, yours, when you talked about Spiro careers, who do you think your most important stakeholders? Who has the biggest voice within that community? would you say? I think I have an idea, but who do you think?
So as we wade into it, it's autism specific service providers, but it's also the autistic community themselves, because especially over 18, they have a say in what they're doing. And that's our target. We're not focused on the 18 below, where the parents make the decisions.
Right.
The people that
So
we're helping.
you're focused on 18. So that's exactly right. So those would be really important. But I also think, Elizabeth, here's something to think about. I know that your focus is on 18 and above, but wouldn't it be great for you to get buy-in from families? Because guess what? You're going to have 16 and 17-year-olds parents that would be looking to your program.
Oh, agreed.
Right?
Yeah, agreed. We don't. Yeah, we're so yes, agreed.
Yeah, so that would be a really super important stakeholder for you. So I invite you, and again, we don't have time in this session tonight, but I invite you to really think about who your important stakeholders are, because I'll tell you one thing: your projects or programs won't be successful until you have stakeholder buy-in. It's really, really important, and we can talk about that later. But just consider that when you're considering your evaluation. Okay. So when we think about evaluation use, we talk about really 5 broad areas. Okay, so evaluations can inform your decision-making, help you set goals, help you plan how you allocate your resources, improve your program design and implementation. They should also help you develop knowledge and skills specifically within what your client's needs are. Okay, so understanding what effective practices are. And then building organizational capacity is super important, right? Like linking with, like when you're designing your social enterprise, you're filling a gap, right? But that doesn't mean just because you're filling a gap that you can't have different partners within society that support your project. And that's really important to think about. And some of you may already have those partners on board. For many of you, I would think influencing social change. And that's what I hear that constant theme within social enterprise, right? Like, I know that you're doing something good for society. You also want to make money and have a career, but you're really influencing social change, right? So, so in that sense, public opinion is going to be really important for you. Accountability, and that's pretty simple. And that is like, are you delivering a viable program or product to society? Are you accountable for your actions? Does your budget support the activities within your program or project? Okay. And then increasing collaboration. Collaboration is super important, right? If you're operating your social enterprise within a silo, not reaching out to other partners, you may find it hard to increase or legitimize your social enterprise. So that's really important. The more people that you get interested in what you do, the better off your social enterprise will be. Okay, so that's something you should think about when you think about evaluation use. So as I mentioned earlier, there's different kinds of program evaluation, but what we're going to be doing tonight is I'm going to be giving you a couple of different tools to start thinking about how you want to structure your evaluation. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a needs assessment. And a needs assessment really helps you hone in on the goals of your actual program or project, and then the best way to reach them. And then the idea of, if you already have a social enterprise in place, how can you keep track of the successes and challenges that you face? Okay, what kinds of activities do you need to engage in? And then the other idea is going into your social enterprise with an evaluative mind, not being afraid of evaluation. And again, I could, if we had time to do a lot of polls, my guess would be, I asked my class this: how many of you are afraid to be evaluated, are afraid of what people say, right? We all get evaluated our entire life, and sometimes negative information can be really turned around and can really help your social enterprise. But we're so used to thinking about evaluation in a negative way, taking tests. What are your marks, right? We live in sort of an evaluative society, right? And program evaluation doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be negative. Okay, so these are just some meaningful evaluation principles that I like to talk about. I'm just going to go through them really quickly. So within your social enterprise, it's really important to create what we call a positive evaluation culture, sort of sharing the idea that evaluation is a good thing, okay? It's useful. Going into your projects with an attitude of inquiry, always asking questions, always asking what works and what doesn't work. And then ensuring useful evaluation. So you want to make sure that, that what you're doing is cost effective, right? If you're going to do an evaluation, there's no point in doing an evaluation if you don't plan on using the results. Like what would be the point of that, right? So one of the questions that I think somebody asked tonight was how do you present or report your evaluation findings, right, in a meaningful way? Well, that's your chance, right? So when you do an evaluation, and I'll give you an example. When I did the evaluation for the Ontario government, and when we compiled all the survey data, we did a pre and post survey. One of the indicators, and many of you, when you talk about your program or your social enterprises, I can already see that your indicators are life outcomes for some of you. Like Elizabeth, I think for you, your one of your indicators should be life outcome, right? You're trying to make a positive, meaningful impact on the lives of the clients in your program. Am I correct about that? Sorry to pick on you, but it's a perfect example, right? So the evaluation I did was measuring life outcomes. And what we looked at was we did a pre-survey where we asked our clients, I had a bunch of different indicators within the survey. I used Likert scales and semantic differential scales. Working with the stakeholders, came up with a bunch of different attributes that could help to measure life outcomes or life success. And then the idea is they took the survey before they entered the program. They had, I think it was 2 months of counseling, and then they did the post survey. And what we were looking for was a change. We wanted to see a change in attitude, a change in behavior, and a change in how we measured life outcomes from negative to positive, right? And so one of the things that I did, and so one of you had a question about qualitative research. One of the things that I did within that quantitative survey was I convinced my superiors to allow me to put an open-ended qualitative question within the survey. The reason I asked to do that was because my thought process was, if the survey doesn't work out, at the very least, we'll have a qualitative question and be able to gauge how people at least feel about the survey. And one of the most meaningful things I was able to do when I presented the data to the Attorney General and the Assistant Deputy Attorney General was I was able to show did a PowerPoint presentation, how many clients said if they didn't have the service, they would be dead. And that was a very meaningful way to display the impact of the program. I mean, there's nothing, basically the program was saving lives, and that was pretty meaningful. So you should all start to think about how am I going to make this evaluation that I do with my social enterprise, how am I going to make it meaningful, and how am I going to present that to the stakeholders or the people who care, okay? So again, that's involving stakeholders. You need buy-in. There's no one best way. I'm not here to tell you how to evaluate. You may have all different, ideas. Just because someone is doing a qualitative approach or a quantitative, there's no one best way. Live it. Make program evaluation a part of your everyday activities. We'll talk about ethics quickly, but you should always practice ethical evaluations. And then knowledge transfer. How am I going to communicate what I learn about the program evaluations to the people who care? Okay, so those are really important principles. So your evaluation users or your stakeholders can be broken down into these categories. So somebody said, people with the money. Well, you're right, the funders. Staff, if you have staff, so your program staff. Policymakers and other practitioners. And again, these are broad. There, of course, are other evaluation users, but these are kind of the key evaluation users. Are there any questions? Please stop me if you have questions. No, we're good. So ethical evaluations, most of you probably are aware of research ethics or have some sort of, understanding of how to conduct research. But we always want to make sure that we conduct an ethical evaluation by making the people that participate within our social enterprise, you know, of the utmost importance, right? So you want to make sure that you are concerned about them. If you're doing this, for example, if you're conducting a survey or a focus group or observation, you want to make sure that the people you're evaluating have the right to decline, right? That it's confidential, that you are clear about how you're using the data, and that you outline what the benefits and risks are for those participating. So that's just a really quick snapshot, but you should all be thinking about how to make your evaluations ethical, okay? So when you're planning your evaluation, so this workshop is going to focus on steps 1, 2, and 3 here. So we're looking at describing the program, focusing the evaluation, and then choosing the right design and methods. That's really what we're going to be focusing on. All of these other components are part of program evaluation, but because in the interest of time, we're really just, this workshop focuses on these 3 parts of the planning of an evaluation, okay? So how many of you have heard of theory of change? Most of you have probably heard of theory of change, right? So when we talk about theory of change, we think about the different synonymous terms that are used for theory of change and logic models. So we have logic models have been referred to as a roadmap, conceptual map, a blueprint for change, an action framework, a program theory, or a pathways map. So really when we talk about, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but when we talk about program evaluation and we talk about theory of change, you can think of a logic model, which is what we're going to be focusing on within this workshop. And again, which is what, if you are applying for government funding, you would probably be asked to focus on the logic model. The theory of change part is what would guide your logic model, but you'll be asked to focus on that part. And the logic model is just a snapshot that illustrates what your program does at a really specific level. So if you think of the logic model as just a part of the theory of change, okay? So theory of change is the big picture, and a logic model is the narrow scope or specific project or program outcome, okay? So we're looking at, when we talk about logic models, the relationship between what you put into the program and results. And it's really a narrow focus on the activities that your social enterprise engages in and the outcomes that are related to those activities. Okay, so really creating measurable indicators. And again, how we display it is usually there's 2 ways to display a logic model. One is in a chart form and one is in a graph form, and we'll look at that shortly. So in this program evaluation workshop, we're really focusing on logic models. Okay, but I know most of you have been introduced to the term theory of change, but we're going to focus on a component of theory of change. So a logic model is a tool that's used very common in government, in universities, really just clarifies what a program does and what goes into it and your problem statement, what you're addressing. And it's really the foundation of your planning for program evaluation, okay? So this is just what a logic model looks like. And again, in your workbook, you have a PDF fillable logic model at the end. That what I'm hoping the goal is, after you do all the exercises, that you'll be able to create your own logic model for your social enterprise. So it comprises a problem statement, which we're going to work on today, a goal. So that's the intended impact over the life of your program or project. Your rationale, so why will the program activities produce results? Your assumption, and that's just basically what is necessary, what do you need for your social enterprise to succeed. Your resources, those are just your inputs, so that's the time, people, materials. So you should start to think about that when you're designing your program evaluation, because that's a really important part of it. If you don't have people or any time or any funds to create a program evaluation or to do it, then that might be problematic. And so the rest of this we'll talk about, when we talk about logic models in detail next week, but I just wanted to introduce you to this concept of the logic model, okay? So, and here's the interesting part. When should I create a logic model? So ideally, for most of you, it's when you start to think about a new program or new social enterprise when you're applying for funding is really the most useful time. And also, you know, after a program begins is okay too, but the most useful time is when you're starting to think about your program. The least useful time is at the very end when your program is nearly complete, right? So you should start to, so for most of you here, this is a good time for you to start to think about creating your logic model, okay? So in your workbook, you have a practice logic model, and the goal is for you to be able to understand the different components and be able to just create a working logic model by the end of this workshop, next week's workshop, okay? So we're going to complete a series of exercises to help you, you know, help you along the way, to help you determine whether or not you're in a good place to create a program evaluation. So again, think of this logic model that you create as what I call a working model, okay? So you can work individually or with a partner if you don't have a program or project to evaluate, okay? Are there any questions so far? I know we're kind of going fast, but that's the nature of an online workshop. Any questions? Go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Sorry. So would engaging with your beta testers, if you're developing a software, could you consider that a project or a program?
I think that would be I think that's one thing that you're doing, Elizabeth. Am I correct? That's a component of a program. Like that's not, is that your main focus, or is that just part of what you're doing?
That's our main focus for, do you mean by the platform?
Yeah, like, so I think what I think for you, Elizabeth, is after you do the first couple exercises, you'll be able to answer that question yourself, because what you need to decide is what's the broad goal, or what's the broad objective of your social enterprise, and that's an activity within your social enterprise. Does that mean, like, that's an activity, you're designing that software, correct?
Yes.
So my guess is that's not the only thing you're doing, right? Because
Why would you guess that? No, sorry. No, that's true.
Because wouldn't there have to be an educational component to that software?
There is an e-learning component. There's a coach
So there
training.
you go. So you're going to have, and again, what I love about these workshops is I find that a lot of people come into them and are confused, because they're like, well, what am I doing? Is it a program or a project, or is it, I'm not sure, I'm creating a product. But by the end of it, usually people have a better idea. So it's good that you have these questions, because the idea of that workbook is it should help you hone in on exactly what you're doing, right? You have your broad program, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a problem statement, something you're going to address, and you have activities that your social enterprise is engaging in to meet that objective or goal.
The scary thing is that I took my fundamentals of project management a couple of years ago.
That's okay. Program evaluation is a very different thing, right? So that's why my sense was, when you said software, you're not just going to develop software and be done with it. You're going to have to, if people are using it, they're going to have to be educated on how to use it, right?
Oh,
So
there's beyond that, but yes.
Yeah, exactly. But that's a good question. But I think once you go through the workbook, Elizabeth, it'll probably be a little bit clearer for you, because it's going to ask you specific questions. Okay.
Okie dokie.
So evaluation questions, and these are what you should start to think about. And again, these are not the questions that you would ask in your evaluation. Okay. These are what you need to think about to meet your stated goals. Okay, these are going to help you develop your data collection techniques later on. So these are not what you're going to ask people or ask, you know, the community that you're serving. These are how you frame your evaluation. So the first one is relevance. Is your program or service or product, is it needed? Okay, or if it's already developed, is it still needed? Implementation. How well designed is your social enterprise program or project? Okay. Is the program being implemented as planned, or are you doing things a little differently than you originally thought? What parts of your program or project work best and why? Outcomes, and this is a big thing, and I think this is what many of you are going to focus on. Has anything changed for your clients? Okay, so what have you done to create positive life changes for your clients? Okay, that's going to be, I think, for most of you, your key. Efficiency. Is the program efficient? What do I mean by that? Well, are you spending $1 million to serve 5 people? That's not very efficient, right? Are you spending $100,000 to serve, a community, right? Like, how efficient is your program, right? Does it make sense? Are you getting bang for your buck? Are you actually spending money wisely? And then sustainability. I always ask this question, and I find everybody in social enterprise is focused on, like, not just creating a one-off social enterprise, but something that is around 10 years from now. Am I right about that? Is that a fair assumption? Yeah, right? Is it sustainable? So you need to think about what do you need to maintain success? So let's take, I think we're pretty good for timing. Does anyone have any other questions before we get into our first exercise here? Are there any questions? Feel free to speak up. I can't see the chat box on my end, Cole, so let me know if there's a question. Any questions? Okay, so what I thought would be to start out, our first exercise would be for you to, if you look at the worksheet A, which will help you fill out part 1 of the program evaluation for social enterprise workbook. So really, and you can do this in total point form, that's completely fine, but really you want to describe your problem statement. So what is the problem that your program or project is really trying to solve? Okay, so why don't we take, what do you think, Cole? Do you want to take like 5 or 10 minutes, or are we good for time, do you think? Oh, I can't hear you, Cole. I think, oh.
I put my thing up and I forgot. I think what would be most appropriate would probably be if we take 10 minutes, allocating at least 5 minutes for us to think about and kind of look through what's happening, maybe develop that little statement, and then also 5 minutes if anybody needs to take a quick bio break. So we'll meet back, I guess, at 7:10. Does that seem adequate?
Good. Yeah.
Sorry, are we aiming to end at 7:30?
Usually around that time we're.
Yeah, the only reason so I started an online knitting group for COVID, right? Which starts at 7:30. So
we'll do 5 minutes. We'll do 5 minutes.
No. Like I'll hop out early. That's all good. Do what you got to do. I'm just checking.
One thing I will mention, the session will be recorded, and it is being recorded. So if you do miss anything come the end of the session, then it will be forwarded to you afterwards.
Then we're good to go.
And I'll just mention to everybody with the workbooks, I specifically created this workbook step by step to help you unpack. Instead of, I have been in classes or I've been in workshops where I've been told by the instructor, okay, let's do a logic model. And you're almost looking at everyone glass-eyed because you're like, well, how do I don't know what that is. So I've done it in a way that if you complete each step, it feeds into the logic model. So I've just tried to unpack that logic model for you and explain each step for you. Okay, so I will be here. Are we going into breakout rooms, Cole, or are they going off on their own?
Yeah, just kind of go off on your own, do what you need to do. I have posted in the chat both the links to the entire Google Drive folder that houses every single document, the link to the specific overall worksheet for the workbook for this evening, as well as most recently worksheet A, but I will repost one more time just so everybody has access to everything. The link towards everything, which can be found right here. This is the Drive folder, where you'll find all the different assets and pieces from this evening. And yeah, we'll just take 5 minutes, kind of think on your own. I'm thinking I might even put on a little bit of nice music as we punch through this in the next 5 minutes or so.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna pull your screen share.
Excellent, no problem.
Do that.
Good idea. And I'll just be here if anyone has specific questions. I'll just answer your questions. If you have any.
Do you mind stopping sharing just for a moment?
Oh yeah, sure. I can do that.
Like I mentioned before, we'll just take about 7 more minutes at this point, so about 7:10. Work on your own time. If you need to take a bio break, take a quick bio break. I know I had to pop away just a moment ago to use the washroom, so it happens.
Hey, Marlene, I had a question for you.
Sure.
So I'm working on an e-learning platform, and part of that is, basically helping students with like grade 9 math. And so my question for you is this, like, you want it to be sustainable, and so that means that you have to get money from somewhere. So usually that cost is put onto the client, right? And so I'm trying to balance that social aspect where a lot of the students who are in, low income areas, they can't afford tutors, etc., right? But I can't really use, a free model where, it would be free for everybody. So I was just wondering how you advise on,
Okay,
guess,
so okay,
doing
but
this.
my question for you would be why couldn't you get funding for something like this? Like why would you think that the government wouldn't be interested in, especially if you're targeting low income clients?
Yeah.
Or high risk, at risk students? Why? Because the thing is, what you have to think about is, and this is a whole other topic, but we have something called social return on investment, right? So
Right.
the government will invest money on things that will provide a return, right? So think about what your platform is doing and how it's going to benefit these students. And
Yep.
so what benefits to society, that's what you really need to communicate. And that's your key. How is it going to benefit society by helping at-risk or low-income students with math? How does that benefit society? I mean, I can think of many ways.
Okay, because I applied to the IRP, for example, and I applied to different grants, but I am incorporated as a for-profit. That's what I incorporated as. And then the second thing is I don't have 2 years of financials, which is one of the things that they ask for. And then the third thing is I don't have any employees. Like we're just, basically we're a startup. And so it's sweat equity. That's what we're putting in. And then, so those are 2 X's right off the bat. So as far as the social return on investment, has that program started? Like I know that they were talking about it, but
well, that's just I'm talking about that theoretically, the idea, like what I'm seeing.
yeah,
When you're telling me this, like I haven't, full disclosure, I haven't looked at different programs that are being offered by government or by universities, but what you're doing, I mean, I see that as like a huge, I mean, the other thing you can do is, I mean, if what you're saying, you don't qualify for government funding, which
right.
I'm still not entirely sure about. Like I'm still not, because I work for the government and we had for-profit, clients. So I'm still not quite sure. But again, you're probably right. But like, why not look to the business community to help you? Like this,
Yeah.
because what I'm seeing, what you're doing is, like, I don't exactly know the product you created, but I see a huge benefit to society. You might be thinking, oh, just math, right? But what are the benefits if you help people with math?
Right, exactly. And
Like,
that's why we started it. But I guess like as far as the funding is concerned, like I have looked into it, but I was hoping, I don't know if there's anything else. It is tough as a startup just because we don't have the financials and we don't have the employees. And the IRP was I was hoping to get something from IRP, but it's a lot of competition as well, right? So
Here's the other thing you may want to do is, have you thought about linking up with an academic, like somebody from like education, and actually applying for like a grant to conduct a study? Because how I see this is, like, if you've created something to help students with grade 9 math, that's huge, right? Like,
Right.
So you could link with an academic who could then apply for actual grants. Like, there are huge technology and SSHRC grants, like a lot of money that you can get, like $300,000, some of them. So you might want to try to link with like somebody from the academic sector, like specifically a university.
Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, if you, and again, then how does program evaluation apply to you? Oh, I can see many ways. You
Right.
would want to be doing, I mean, you would be doing experiments, I think, is what you have. And those, I mean, that is, in program evaluation, that's the gold standard, right?
Right.
You're looking at performance before, and I'm assuming, without knowing too much about your platform, I'm assuming it will help students, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you want to measure after, and that's huge.
Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So
And then if you can license your software, you know, that's like that might be your next step, right? So
right. Okay. No, thank you. Yeah.
very interesting.
That's yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. No, I'll definitely you know, look and maybe approach OISE or you know, other educational facilities or universities. I have reached out in the past. It's yeah.
You want to
so.
email Dr. Scott Davies from OISE or Dr. Janice Orini from Waterloo.
Okay, sorry. Let me just write that down. Scott Davies.
Yeah, Dr. Scott Davies.
And that's at OISE UT. Yep.
OISE, yeah. And I mean, he was a prof at Mac when I went. Great, fantastic academic. And if he can't help you, may know of people who might be interested in this.
Sure.
And then Dr. Janice Orini, AURINI.
AQR.
AUR.
Oh, AUR.
Sorry, AUR, yeah, or INI, Orini.
Okay.
And they're big publishers in education. So, you know, they may, you know, if they can't help you, they may know somebody who might be interested in this.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was also going to add, so Kuji, I think I'm maybe a year ahead of where you are at. And for me, I agree. If you want to look up Innoved at OISE, they are sort of focused on the research aspects, but in also helping either startups or in any level who are interested in that education related engagement, whether you're an enterprise or a startup, etc. I've recently been in conversations with them as well, and more for the research and looking at it from an evaluation perspective.
Okay.
Maybe they may have some suggestions or yeah, so if you're interested, we can connect, and I can also point to specific people within OISE, but Marlene works
awesome.
for newer names, I think, to also look into, because I'm in a similar area of interest, broader STEAM aspects, but along the same lines as what you also mentioned. And yes, funding has been a challenge.
Yes.
Funding is always a challenge, right? Like funding,
yes.
You know, when I worked for the government, when we were, when I was evaluating grant applications, I mean, for every 20 applications, there was 1 or 2 organizations that would win the grant, and you have 18 to 20 others that don't, right? So they're not getting that money, and they have great ideas. It's just, they didn't, you know, they might've been 2 or 3 points less than the other applicants, right? And that's just how the process works. So if you've applied for a grant and haven't gotten the grant, like, has that happened to anyone in this session? Have you applied and not gotten it? Because if that happens, you should always ask for a debrief, right? Always ask and for an explanation of why you were not the successful candidate. Always ask.
No, for sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, by Rafi. Yep, thank you.
No problem. Yeah, I think as a for-profit as well, I think that is one of those biggest obstacles, in that as much as there is funding available, often it is to, especially education related, often tends to be more open to say the school systems or not-for-profits or academic institutions. So for
Academics, but
us,
if you can link with somebody who would be interested in your what you're doing, in studying it, then that, you know, that is a good thing. That's never a bad thing.
for sure. Yeah. So
So, are there
So
any other
maybe
questions?
maybe for the I was just going to say we're at 7:12 now, so I just want to be cognizant of the time as well. So yeah, so I was just going to say one more question, and then if anything, and then probably pop back into the session.
So I guess what I also kind of want, I'm going to ask a question since no one's putting their hand up. Are you all okay with coming up with your problem statement? Was that fairly straightforward? Did anybody have any challenges? Because that is your first step in program evaluation, right? Like, you have to know what your problem is, what you're addressing. Okay, and again, it doesn't have to be finessed. This session, you're not going to come up with this perfect logic model. It's a working model, right? And it will change over the course of, you know, of your evaluation or your evaluation proposal. Should I just go on, Cole, and share my screen in the interest of time? Okay. Okay, so I mentioned at the very beginning, there are 7 different types of program evaluation. And so what we're going to be focusing on today is we're going to be looking at an evaluability assessment and a needs assessment. This is the first step in doing a program evaluation. Next week, we're going to be looking at efficiency, and then the key program evaluation is impact and outcome, which is what I think most of you will be doing. We're not going to look at implementation and process or monitoring or program review. Program review is like the big kahuna. It is the big program evaluation. Usually you have like 20 people doing it. It takes a year or two. And that's usually like a very mature and well-established government program is what you do a program review with. Okay, so, or something like UNICEF or something, or like a big organization, that would be how you would conduct a program review, or how it would apply. So with an evaluability assessment, you're really looking at the extent to which your program or project is ready for evaluation. We're going to be looking at the type of evaluation most appropriate to the stage of your social enterprise, which is, I think, for most of you, going to be an outcome or impact evaluation. We're going to be looking at the steps and the scope of the evaluation. And then again, what feeds into your evaluation or the program context. So that could be the funding, for example, which many of you are focusing on because, you know, we need money, right? So in an evaluability assessment, you're interested in knowing, do your stakeholders agree with your program goals? Do you have sufficient resources available? And again, when you do the workbook, you're going to be doing this evaluability assessment by answering the questions in the workbook. So essentially, you're going to be, if you can't get past part 3 in the workbook, then you're not quite ready for program evaluation. If you get all the way to step 4, then your social enterprise is ready for program evaluation. Is anybody interested in your findings? Okay, so, and is there an opportunity to change something? And the most important thing is, can you get the right information, right? So can you, will you be able to get the right information? So Elizabeth, I'm going to pick on you for a second because I know you have to go. So what
I
might
just kept my camera off. That would have been
what might be something that you have to consider when you do this evaluation? What would be, and I'm specifically what I'm thinking of, I'm sorry, Professor Marlene's coming out here, so I'm asking.
all good. I used to be an instructor, so I get
so
the
there
mindset.
you go. So I'm going to give you a hint. I'm more talking about ethics. So what would you have to consider when you do your program evaluation? Specifically with the population that you're serving.
We have to make sure that the autism community has a voice in the conversation. So we can't run a program. I'll back up for a second. We're developing our project, the platform, in conjunction with the autism community.
Right.
So that at the end of it all, we have a platform that has been tested and developed with the people in mind that we're trying to help.
So
So-
if the people in mind that you're trying to help are people that have autism, I assume, correct?
Yep.
So would you consider them to be a vulnerable population?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that is going to be an extra concern for you. You have to think about when you evaluate your program, how can I do this? And again, I pick on you specifically
Have at her.
because I don't think you can do it without having a program, an advisory committee. It doesn't have to be a big one.
So we do.
You. Yeah, well, perfect. There you go.
Yep.
So you're a step ahead to help you with the evaluation. You need
Yeah.
to have buy-in on the right types of questions to ask. And I'm going to give you an example. When I did the evaluation for the government, and here I am, this newly minted PhD, thinking I know everything, right? Which I know nothing. Okay, let me just tell you that first off. I go into this program evaluation proposal that I designed, but I designed a really good survey. But the problem with my survey was the language that I had used in my survey. The executive directors, sexual assault survivors said, Marlene, you can't use those words because you're going to re-traumatize the victim. So how about instead of using this word, for example, you're not going to use the word victim at all in this questionnaire. We talk
Yes.
about survivors, right? So I had to get schooled on the kinds of terminology that I could use. So that's why you need to have buy-in. Whether or not you're an expert in that field or not, it's always good to have buy-in. And it's always good to pilot, if you're going to do a survey, to pilot your survey.
We're fortunate in that I'm pretty good at developing partnerships. And so I'm working with CASDA, which is the Canadian Autism Spectrum Disorders Alliance, on a couple of different things, including a podcast that highlights their national autism strategy and the national framework they're creating around research and processes.
Great.
I also have a not-for-profit called Socially ASD that's specifically for adults 18 plus on the spectrum, and 60% of our board is on the spectrum. So I call the neurotypical people on the board, we're the spackle for the executive function deficit, but it's our board that's directing the direction for the not-for-profit. So we already have those kinds of things put in place to make sure that we are navigating all of those landmines.
So you're one step ahead. So I used your example just so others might think about their own social enterprises, what they have to consider. So like, it sounds like you're in a really good position, Elizabeth. Like you're ready to go. You have all the pieces in place. So I think
from your lips to God's ears.
You're going to get a lot out of this session because I think you're in a great position for evaluating. So anyway, that is what I want you to all of you to think about. Can you get the right information? How are you going to get it? And are you working with, is any subset of your population vulnerable, right? And that needs to be at the forefront of when you design an evaluation. So a needs assessment, that's the second component we're going to talk about. This is usually done to determine the type of program and services or products required. So some of you might be in this position. Some of you might be thinking about what are the needs of existing clients? What are the results over time if you look at the trends or do research? Because many of you, before you start your social enterprise, I imagine you start with research, right? To identify the gaps within society and to identify the needs. So do any existing programs serve those clients? And if they do, that's okay, but how do they serve them? And how will your social enterprise address the gaps in service? So that's what a needs assessment does. Okay, and so now we don't have much time, but what I would like you to do, Cole, do we want to have to go off on their own or put them in breakout rooms for 5 or 6 minutes? I guess we're getting near the end. It might be good for them to look at parts 2 and 3 in breakout rooms to discuss it. They won't get it done today, but maybe as a bit of homework, I know we all hate homework, to maybe try to have it done for next week.
Yeah, that'd be a really big recommendation of mine, is at least let's maybe break together and have maybe miniature conversations. I'm thinking based on the size of the cohort that we have right now, let's maybe do three groups.
Okay.
and then go from there. Does that seem fair?
Yep.
So I will start assigning some of the breakout rooms. And you'll just have to give me a moment because, I myself didn't think to quickly do this ahead of time, so you'll have to give me a second. But I'll try and break it up fairly evenly from this perspective and go from there. And we'll see what we can do. One moment. And let's go. All right. So I will open the rooms. There should be roughly 2 to 3 people per venture in each of the rooms. Feel free to go, and let's meet back in 15.
Sounds good.
Sam, are you good to enter into the room?
Oh, I think I lost you, Isaiah. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. I think we got to head back to the main.
Yeah, I think so. I just my last point was: had you ever thought about doing anything like you know, has it ever been done like television, a series, that highlights the
we're getting there, and yeah, actually, that's my goal of like this company. Like my brother really loves like Life Below Zero and these outdoor shows on Discovery, but there's a missing link of story. Like,
yeah, I think it's really interesting.
They make it more dramatic, like someone's getting water and it was kind of this big deal, but I'm like, he's just walking to get water, guys, in the wintertime. But so I want to do that based in our communities, but also it's accessing the stories of the land and the history. That's where the stories are also, and then the modern lifestyle of still people living on the land. And this can be pitched towards like, a lot of outdoor networks. Well, I was kind of I have a goal dream to kind of travel the world and kind of travel as much indigenous communities around the world as I can, but then to film them. But I thought one concept could be food, like a very indigenous culinary arts, and that because that's a whole huge genre on its own, and then I could have these accesses. So this is where also my education applies. It also taught us how to, I guess, be indie filmmakers, where we have to kind of finesse to get into certain places. But also my those are the lofty goals, but my really bigger goal is just to give opportunity and space to people and communities to tell their story that otherwise didn't have that opportunity to do so, and then give them the tools while I work with them, like, hey, I can kind of teach you what I can, or you can bring me back to do workshops or whatever.
Isaiah, I don't mean to cut you off again. Sorry. I love the idea. I'd love to actually talk to you about a connection that I'd love to help facilitate with you regarding Indigenous communities in Canada, because I think it could be a really good fit.
Just going off with everyone coming in here.
So I just want to be cognizant of time and kind of wrap up before we end for the evening, but you're welcome to stay for a little bit longer if you want after the fact.
Okay, so I'll just be fairly quick here. So the goal of tonight was for you to start part 1, 2, and 3. So have your problem statement, look at your evaluability assessment and needs assessment. You don't need to be confused about these parts. If you just answer the questions in isolation and is kind of like, follow the map, then it will feed into your logic model that we're going to talk about next week. And if you have questions, that's okay. So I'm going to send you, I'm assuming most of you didn't get part 2 and 3 done. That's okay. I'm going to send you a way trying to figure that out for next week. And then we can start next week with any questions. We have a little bit more time next week. So your next steps would be to try to complete part 1, 2, and 3. And again, it can just be point form. You don't have to write a lot. I'm going to ask you to review parts 4 and 5. Just read them. Just have a kind of a familiarity. And then next week we'll get right into, into creating a logic model. And logic model that you can use if you apply for, funding. You would have like an actual logic model completed. This is what I'm going to do if I'm approved for funding. How I'm going to evaluate what I'm doing. So that's it. Any questions? Awesome. I'm here, so if I know it's a lot of information to take in. So again, I'm sure you can appreciate that what I'm going over tonight with you, I teach my students over the course of an entire semester. So I'm giving you a snapshot. So if you're confused, you probably should be a little confused. That's not a bad thing. So don't feel like if you're confused that it's a bad thing. Because I can answer any questions you have now or next week about about specific program evaluation questions. Any questions at all?
Not at the moment. I think this is a perfect moment for me to also just have these all out and spread on my table, only because I'm about to apply for funding.
Perfect.
And hopefully in partnership with someone at OISE. But the idea is right now just to, as much as there's a broad plan and scope, I think this provides that really good moment to kind of fine tune it and really find what it is that we're wanting to do and how this evaluation process might be that first step in.
Yeah, and you may not have to give them a big broad example of how you'd evaluate the program, but they may ask you specific questions in the grant application that you can, at least hopefully this session will help you answer those questions.
Yeah. So thank you for step 1.
Any other questions? Anyone? This is the time, and any question is fine. No, if you don't have questions, that's totally fine. But don't feel like you can't ask. Or if you are more comfortable letting Cole know your question, I can think about it next week and I can address them at the beginning. We can also take that approach, because I know people are probably getting tired too, because it's a lot of information in a short amount of time. So I can appreciate that.
Yeah, I think just for sake of time and maybe letting people go for the evening, I'd like to just say, if you have any other specific questions, shoot me an email or shoot an email to edge.programs with any of the questions that you have, and I'll make sure that those questions get forwarded to Marlene. I posted quickly in the chat, we have a quick feedback form. We hope that you take some time It should be only a couple minutes to fill out that form. Let us know how we did. Let us know what you liked, if you enjoyed the session, because that would be very, very helpful for us in planning for future sessions as we move forward. And last but not least, thank you, Marlene, very much for facilitating the session this evening. We're very grateful.
I really enjoy these sessions. I find them really interesting, and I think about ideas too. So I know that if anybody wants to talk to me after, I mean, I don't know, Cole, should I stay behind, or I can, you know, we can.
That is completely up to you. I will also stay behind for the duration if anybody has any questions regarding Edge specifically as well.
So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions or have a chat. Let me know.
But otherwise, technically, the rest of you are free to go for the evening if you so choose. I will stop recording now.
Sounds good.